Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. Welcome back to Marko Coding Academy, where we learn programming in a fun and easy way. Have you ever found yourself struggling with your dependencies inside of ASP.NET Core application? If so, you're not alone, my friend. I mean, everybody was struggling with dependencies and ways to manage them properly while beginning their programming careers. Even after the beginnings, it can get complex at certain times. So in this video, we will be talking about IServiceScope interface and what are its benefits, responsibilities, and proper use scenarios, so you would be able to master it all and only benefit from the information you're about to acquire. So if this sounds tempting to you, sit down, relax, and enjoy the video. To get things started, let us ask ourselves a question: what actually is IServiceScope, and what are its main responsibilities, and what makes it so important for dependency injection in ASP.NET Core? So mainly, as its name suggests, it is connected to scoped services. So when you create a service that has a scoped lifetime, it will be assigned to one of the IServiceScope instances dedicated to the scope for which this scoped service is created for. And then the instance of IServiceScope will be supposed to manage and make sure that this service is disposed at the moment when this scope is expired. Or basically, if we are talking about requests, because as you know, scoped services are created to be used within one request, as soon as everything that is supposed to be done within a single request is performed, in that scenario, IServiceScope is going to make sure that all of the services that were required in that request are disposed, and then it will itself be disposed. We already mentioned this behavior in our previous video where we spoke about the disposal of services with different lifetimes, and when I was speaking about scoped services, I was mentioning this relationship between IServiceScope interface and the scoped lifetime services. So if you want to see that explanation, you can go to this video dedicated to disposal of services and find out something new. So now that we got all of that out of the way, I think is an amazing moment to start discussing the responsibilities of IServiceScope interface. So what do you say? I say, let's jump right into it. So its first responsibility is service resolution. So IServiceScope provides a container for resolving scoped services. The second responsibility is service lifetime management, basically ensuring that all of those services are handled with a proper lifetime behavior. And finally, it is responsible for resource management. Basically, by defining a scope, our IServiceScope interface created for that scope is responsible for making sure that all the resources needed for that scope get disposed and released, ready to be reused again once that scope has ended. I'm talking about things like database connections, file handlers, or basically anything that is a resource needed for certain scoped service to function properly. And now that we managed to cover all the responsibilities of IServiceScope interface, it is time to see how it works in action. So let's jump to our Visual Studio and do just that. Bye. And right here we have our regular home controller, and inside of it we have a private read-only field which is called service provider, and it is of type, you guessed it, of iService provider. So we basically use our constructor injection to inject the new instance of our service provider interface, And then in our action, we create a new scope by invoking createScope method on service provider instance, and we get a new IServiceScope instance. Now, with this instance, we will invoke the property called service provider, which is of type IServiceProvider, and then we get a service for email service that we've been using in previous videos as well, so the implementation is exactly the same, but right here we're creating explicitly a new scope that is going to be created just to be able to send a new email. As soon as this scope is ended, or basically we have exited these brackets, we are done with this scope, and all of the resources within this scope will be disposed of. So that is how things work right here. And the same way as was the case with IServiceProvider in the previous video, here you do not want to be using this explicit advanced syntax unless you actually need it in your code. If you do not, you can just use your regular dependency injection registration process to create services that are registered with scoped lifetimes, and then just inject them here and use them, and they will have scoped lifetime work exactly like you want them to, and everything will be perfect. But here, we wanted to create an explicit scope within which we want our service to be available. As soon as we exit this scope, we want our resources to be disposed of and released for other actions to take place. Now that we saw how it works even in action, I think is as good moment as any to see what are some of the best practices and common issues that you might stumble upon when working with IServiceScope interface. The first practice I recommend is avoid long-lasting services. So you want to make sure that your scoped services live as shortly as possible. As soon as you're done executing everything you wanted to execute with them, you just dispose of them and release the resources. Second point, you want to dispose of your services properly, because if you do not, you will end up with memory leaks and your application will be very unstable for sure, and you do not want that. So make sure that all of your services are getting disposed of properly. And finally, we have correct service lifetimes. So you want to register all of your services with lifetimes that reflect their use scenarios. You do not want to be using, for example, singleton service for something that is a very lightweight service that has a single responsibility that gets invoked once in a while, and you basically, by using singleton instance, you have managed and allocated certain part of your memory that is constantly being filled with this instance of a singleton service, and it is not released at all throughout the entire lifetime of your application. So in those cases, you definitely want to consider whether transient or scoped services are a better approach. And in conclusion, IServiceScope is an amazing interface at our disposal. We can use it to create explicit scopes within which we want to use some services and be sure that they're disposed of after we have exited this scope of theirs. We have explicit hands-on approach that I showed you in example, and also you have your straightforward, regular, scoped service lifetime approach where you just register your services as scoped lifetime services, and IServiceScope instance will be created for those scopes, and that instance will manage the lifetime of your services for you automatically. Basically, by understanding and mastering these concepts, you will be on a way to becoming an amazing developer, being able to write and create amazing performing applications without any lifetime issues. And you do want that, right? So if you want to truly master this, I highly recommend you to spend some time practicing this stuff and make sure that it all comes down and you understand it really well in your own mind. I hope you enjoyed this video, because if you did, there is a lot of different videos in this channel that are very beneficial, just as this one. So spend some time browsing through them, find something fun for you, and grow as a programmer. I mean, after all, that's what this channel is all about. So subscribe, turn on the notifications, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Happy coding!